Welcome to Sex Help for Smart People. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Juergens, former science professor turned somatic sexologist and intimacy coach. This podcast is all about using evidence-based practices to help high-achieving women and their partners of all genders get the affection, connection, and great sex you want. So let's get at it. Welcome to episode 20. This is a special one. It's an interview with my colleague, BDSM and kink expert, Kat Rose. She is a Femme Domme, and we are going to have a fun conversation. So I hope you enjoy. Hey, welcome everyone. Today I am so excited to welcome my guest, my fellow Somatica coach and BDSM kink expert, Kat Rose. We are talking about what to do and what not to do when you're getting started with BDSM and kink. And I always enjoy talking with Kat. So I know we're going to have fun today, and we're just going to jump in and we'll see where this goes. But first, how about, Kat, can you introduce yourself and just what you do for everyone?
Yeah. So hi, my name's Kat. And so I've been involved in my local kink BDS scene for about 5 years, like 2019. Always kind of had an interest in it. And for the last year or so, I have been working on getting certified as a somatic coach, as Laura mentioned. So really looking forward to tying all of these things together in my future work.
Thanks so much. So today, why don't we just start with some definitions? Because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. So I just want to ask you, I have kind of my favorite pet definitions, but for you, what are your definitions of BDSM and kink, and are they different for you?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a slight difference for me in that, kink is pretty much anything that's like atypical, right? You just find in the average population, like kink is the opposite end of the spectrum from and I think that is like kink is a great umbrella term because there are a lot of folks who's, like, for example, are really, a heterosexual couple really enjoys anal sex, the female partner enjoys receiving anal sex, and they consider that to be kinky. And that's okay, because outside of the heteronormative, way of being, right? So, I think kink is like the big umbrella term, and BDSM falls underneath that. In that, you have the three different sections of BDSM, the bondage and discipline, the dominance and submission, and then the sadism and masochism. So those are three very specific zones that, people even practicing BDSM don't even practice the whole realm of BDSM oftentimes, right? So I think it's just, narrow and narrower definitions.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for everybody listening, can you just break down those three different parts of BDSM? Because I love that you mentioned that. It is so common that people don't really understand. Even if they know what the acronym stands for, they don't really understand those different flavors that people might be playing in.
Absolutely. Yes. So this is something that I think, and this touches on, something that I, want to talk about a little bit in depth later, but a lot of people don't realize how broad BDSM really is. All that we're ever really shown in, media is mostly like the sadomasochism, the classic dominatrix sort of thing, with a little bit, of the bondage and discipline, right? And what I think is really, really missing in the concept of BDSM as a whole is actually that middle section of DS, which is the dominance submission. So dominance and submission, it's not about what you're doing. It's about why you're doing it. So dominance and submission doesn't have to have any of the other stuff. You don't have to have ropes. You don't have to have floggers. You don't have to do a darn thing that's physical. It's all about your headspace.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really important distinction that people don't understand. You know, you get in, I'm sure we'll kind of get into different roles that people can take on, but there's so much conflation with the roles, and people don't understand that being dominant or being submissive is a way of being. Yeah, the actions that you do with kink affirm what you are. Whereas, you know, in bondage and discipline or sadism and masochism, you do certain things in order to get yourself to a certain state.
Like the whippy pokey bindy things, right? To get
Yes.
yourself to a certain state. But with dominance and submission, you're really focused on that power dynamic explicitly without necessarily needing toys or anything or any special outfits or anything. In fact, we can do a demo right now. Do you want to do a little demo? I'm really switchy. So I kind of do like top bottom rolls are cool with me. So and I don't, you're mostly in the like femdom space, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So can we do a little example for people of what you can do with a DS dynamic really easily with no props?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, this brings in a really important thing that I wanted to talk about
Yes,
anyway, which is
exactly.
negotiation. So even though, you know, talking to our listeners, you know, even though Laura and I know each other a little bit, I've never like done anything with Laura as far as
Mhm.
even a mini scene. So I'm going to take this opportunity to negotiate a little bit.
Yep.
So Laura, we're just going to try on some verbal play here, if that's
Hmm.
okay with you. I know you
Absolutely.
suggested it. um, as the are there any words or phrases that you do not want to hear are hard limits for you?
Yeah, so my flavor of bottom is more of a good girl. I do not like to be humiliated. I don't like to be put down. So I'm also pretty resistant and um it can take a little bit of effort.
Okay. Okay.
But it like a safe dom space is always really good for me. So the things I don't like to hear are like I don't like to be called names that are derogatory. I like to be praised, but I do like to have people just be kind of like, I've got you. Like you're gonna just give me all the things.
Love it. All right. Great. Tells me so much because it's really, really easy to think that like, oh, DS is DS, but there are so many flavors of dominance and submission that you can't just assume that a person wants to be degraded because that's what you like or that's what you read in a book or in a movie. Like, so it's really important to have these kind of conversations. So thank you for sharing that with me, Laura. So that helps me kind of pick which flavor I want to bring. Are you ready for me to kind of
I am.
come? I'm just going to kind of bring a thing where I'm just going to have a little conversation back and forth with you. Sound good?
Yeah, and I actually want to pause for just a moment and just let people know that like if we were doing anything more than verbal, here. And if we were in the same space, which we are not, because Kat's in what, San Diego, and I'm here in
Yeah.
Nashville.
Yes.
So we would also be talking about safe words, and we would also be talking about any sort of like physical limitations, any things that are uncomfortable, any injuries, like all of those things would be negotiated. So right now we're just doing a very like simple example. We're not expecting anything is going to be really outside my comfort zone that I didn't just mention to her. So she knows, kind of like where my yellow and red zones are right now. But if, for example, she said something to me that was really hard for me and I needed a moment to process, I would probably just use the easiest way of giving signals, of giving like like just green, yellow, red, right? Like red is like my safe word in that case where I'm just like, no, we are stopping. Okay. So I just wanted to like put that caveat out there because we're playing just with words. It can seem like we're skipping a step, but that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So, all right. So just kind of like drop
Yeah.
into my
Yeah.
headspace a little bit. Okay. Mm, Laura, I am so excited to hear all the ways that you've been such a good girl today. I want you to tell me why you've earned a little bit of fun time today.
Mm.
I want to hear all the
I,
ways you've been my good girl.
well, I made myself pretty for you,
Mm,
and I am, and I did, I've got all the things I wanted to do this morning out of the way, so I am free for
mm,
you.
all
And
for me.
yes, all for you.
Mm, yummy. I love how you've brought yourself to me so delicious and fresh and free. Mm, such a good girl. You look like such a yummy snack. Ready to play?
I am.
Mm, okay. All
So that
right.
was a
So,
really great mini example. That was like a snack of a little
yeah,
like intro DS dynamic where you can tell there's a power play, right? Like you can tell that I am accepting and like enjoying being in a more sub role. And Kat is really taking the lead here.
yeah, that felt good. How did that feel for you?
Yeah, it was really fun.
Okay,
And
good.
I'm thinking people probably got, when we're talking about it and describing it, it's one thing, but then, when we give an example and you do such a beautiful job of that, holding that space for me, that is one version, right, of
Yes,
like a dominant role is like just like holding a really like loving, caring space for somebody to relax into their sub, right? But
absolutely.
that is just like such a great demo for people, I think. Thank
Good. I'm glad.
you.
You're welcome. That was fun.
So is there any way that we didn't answer that first question? I guess we didn't really talk about sadomasochism.
Okay.
So maybe
Um,
people
uh,
kind of understand what that is a little bit more than the DS.
yeah. So as one of those folks who slides heavier into more of the SM part of the umbrella, the spectrum, whatever, it's really interesting. So, I've uh, been on the masochist side of things quite a bit in my um, earlier stages, and so I have a different I have a view on it from the inside.
Yeah, I love that you have a
Um,
broad view.
um, so for me, when I came into the scene, I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but it was very much like shadow work for me, very much like me trying to incorporate the parts of myself that I did not so long. And what was really powerful me and the masochist role was receiving that pain helped me like break apart the armor that I've built around myself. It was it was almost like I needed the physical pain coming from the outside to validate the emotion pain I was feeling on the inside.
Mm,
And that was so incredibly powerful of an experience. And this was, over a long period of time, multiple experiences, but that's what I got out of it. I know there are other people who are also masochists who experience things very differently. So you can experience pleasure as actual pain. You may just be wired a little bit differently, and that's totally cool. Where's your jam? That's great. And there are also people who, um, I don't consider myself a masochist so much anymore, but um, people who continue to identify as one, I really believe it's a way for them to process difficult emotions, especially for people who are socialized not to feel. men are socialized not to be emotional creatures. So, I think having that input of pain, does something to balance or alchemize the internal emotional stuff that's going on. For me,
Absolutely.
yeah. On the other side of that, on like the sadism side, um, it was something in me that I thought was so twisted and broken. And like, I don't know, I grew up in the 80s, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, like with that huge bullwhip, and it's like I just
So hot.
that imprinted on me. Okay, I'm
It's
not saying
such
it's
a
all
hot
her fault.
archetype.
Yeah, saying that's it's all her fault, but it's definitely input. But it's just like why do I have these urges? Like why do I want to do these things? And the important thing, the distinction between someone who's a sadist within the BDSM umbrella and somebody who's a sociopath, right, is all about consent, right? Like I
Yeah.
have been able to find partners who desire what I have to give.
Yep.
And for me, even on this side of, the sadist side of the slash, it is still shadow work to me, for me, because I can process all of my feminine rage and send it out to a willing vessel, a vessel who needs it, who craves it, because that's the magic that they use within themselves, care of themselves. So it really
Yeah.
is a partnership.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually a really helpful mutual partnership when you have
Yes.
people whose kinks really fit together and whose shadows really fit, the shadows that they're working on really fit
Yeah.
together in this way. And it doesn't always have to be erotically, but a lot of times it is. Although not all BDSM or kink even really results in any sort of real, what we would call sex or like genital contact or anything, but can either be an erotic experience without sex or can be just kind of a cathartic emotional experience for a lot of people. And one of the things that comes up pretty regularly for my clients is, and for people I just sort of know in colleagues and peers in the world, is that sometimes a little bit of a little pain can also help us get in our bodies. That doesn't work that way for me, but for a lot of people who have a hard time getting in their bodies on a day-to-day basis, a little bit of really intense sensation can be really helpful. So they may not be sort of hardcore masochists, and there's always a spectrum on everything that we're talking about. You don't have to be interested in, the most intense versions of masochism to enjoy a little
Yeah.
bit. And you don't have to be interested
Absolutely.
in the most intense physical versions of sadism to, maybe you're more of a psychological sadist, and that is its own flavor and pleasure for some people. And when you find a partner who sort of fits with that and really enjoys it, it can be really great for both of you. So
Yeah.
thanks. Yes, that was such
Absolutely.
a great explanation. I'm so grateful that you brought in your personal experience too, because that really helps illustrate what we're talking about, right? Like there are a lot of people and they're all a little bit different, but there are a lot of different ways to approach BDSM and kink.
Mhm.
And all of them are kind of a personal journey. And just like Kat's talking about, they're not static. Like you don't have to stay in one role either. And I love that you brought up shadow work. I'm actually going to do a whole podcast explaining more about shadow work and how it relates to sex soon. But just for
But
people who aren't familiar with that term, we're talking about kind of like these deep parts of ourselves that we tend to kind of quote unquote exile or not really want to engage with, but that are really parts of everybody, and some of us have stronger ones than others, especially if we have tried to really push them down. We might not want to acknowledge that we're kind of attention whores, or we might not really want to acknowledge that we have like this sort of like kind of destroyer side or like a vindictive side, right? And those are some of the shadows. There's just some examples of shadows that might come out um, through this type of work that can be really important psychologically to integrate and accept yourself as you
Yeah.
do it.
And I wanted to add to that a little bit too. Like our shadow size necessarily have to be like bad things either. Like one of
Totally.
the things that I loved in my shadow was my little girl innocence and playfulness, right? So exploring that and letting that out within a safe container was super powerful.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell y'all right now that that little me actually being a bit of a good girl and actually doing something for Kat and like being in that role play, that's a shadow for me. I had to be incredibly independent and I was very much bullied into being like feminine as a child. And so for me, even being feminine is a shadow side. And so I embrace both of those things in part just through really innocent play like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what about when you first started out, what do you wish you kind of knew going into the BDSM scene, or what do you think you wish newbies knew more now?
Yeah. So we already touched on the that it's psychological territory, right?
Yep.
So this is something that I wish people had more of an understanding that like you can go into it and like just with really lighthearted fun intentions. Like these are new toys, like these are great things. We're gonna have a great time. I want people to know that things might bubble up that we had no idea were lurking underneath the surface for
Mhm.
both partners, the person receiving the action and also the person giving or doing, right? Like
Yes.
both people can have things bubble up, and both people, all people involved, are allowed to have limits and state their boundaries, use their safe words. Um,
Oh
so
my gosh.
that
100%.
having that just acknowledgement like, hey, we're going to do some stuff and our intention is fun, and stuff bubbles up, we can stop. Here are our safe words, and we can have a repair conversation about it. The foreknowledge that it's potentially murky territory and the willingness to commit to repair afterward if stuff comes up are the two big things I would say are most
Yeah.
important.
It's so important that even when you've had a negotiation about a scene and you've had a negotiation about all your consent and all this stuff, that that you're really tracking what's going on for you in the moment and that you feel okay calling it. And it's funny
Yeah.
because there's some weird analogies for me just because of my background in science and as a scuba diver. So I like this is so normal for me, but it's really not normal for a lot of people. And I see it when I, for example, go eat like on a recreational dive or a scientific scuba dive. If the weather condition, like we're all excited. Everybody wants to either get this work done or like go see what cool stuff is underwater. And we get out there and there's like 12-foot swell and like a storm coming in and we'll be fine underwater, but the problem is getting back on the boat is like you've got a ladder that's just like moving up and down, 30 feet, like slamming into the water. It's just not safe. And people are so reluctant to just call it. But you got to just say, we're going to turn this boat around and we're going to call it. It may be the last day of vacation. It may be the last day you have to collect these data. You got to call it. And I think BDSM is kind of like that. It's a weird
Absolutely.
analogy, but it's actually like really appropriate. Like sometimes you just got to call it and not feel bad about yourself for doing it, no matter how excited you were going into this whole scene or endeavor.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that just happened to me like a few days ago. Like my boyfriend and I had a date planned. And, like he ended up like just not feeling so great physically. And I was like, okay, babe, we watch movies couch, and then 2 days later I had my fun. So yeah, that is 100% so important to like really put our mental and physical safety of ourselves and our partners above, the joy, the fun, the exciting rush.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Because you might just get into a scene and maybe you just get, it might even be because you got so turned on. You can get so turned on that you get freaked out. I've definitely had some clients who are trying to lean into being a dom and realizing that they have sadist tendencies, and all of a sudden they're super turned on by hurting somebody, and it terrifies them, and they have, kind of a breakdown about it. And
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
that's so normal. That's okay. You've been told this is bad and wrong. And even though you have a consenting partner, it can be really hard to make a transition to feeling like you're okay for
Yes.
desiring or getting off on somebody else's pain, and being okay with them, like instead of having to sort of like constantly check in with them, right? Like, and a lot of early new doms and
Yeah. Yeah.
tops too, they're kind of like checking in all the time, like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Um, but it's just really normal. The whole process is really normal. So taking a breath, taking a step back, I love that advice so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What about, I think you might have talked about some great things in the BDSM or kink world that most people don't understand, especially as it relates. We've been kind of cautioning around the shadow work, but also celebrating it, right,
Yeah.
as a really beautiful way to work through some psychological challenges in sort of with like fun adult playland, right? But are there any
Absolutely.
other really great things about BDSM and kink that you feel were either surprising to you or you didn't know until you kind of really got into it?
Yeah. I didn't really know how much of like a baby girl side I had, like when I got into it. And having that kind of dynamic for a little while was really liberating because, with a daddy type baby girl, we weren't with each other all of the time. Like we didn't live together or anything like that. But our dynamic was 24/7, and that each and every single of our interactions was in that dynamic, in those headspaces. So whenever I interacted with him, I was free to just like let go of my adult responsibilities and being a kid again, like just be like totally excited about seeing a pretty flower or like a bird flying over, like to actually embody that joy the way a child can, like was so healing for me. So healing.
Hmm. So you got to really
And
meet some really beautiful parts of yourself and maybe even lean into those sort of, we would maybe call them like light sides as opposed to shadow sides,
yeah,
right? But like
yeah.
some of the light sides that we don't get to step into as much as adults, or we feel are kind of exiled in their own way, you got to
Hmm.
step into that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so great. And I guess for me, I would add that one of the things I think that's great about the BDSM kink scene is how much, no, not everybody, this is not universal, and there's never anything that's universal, right, in any
Right.
community. But there is a lot of consent expectations, and there is a pretty heavy emphasis, or there should be, if you're playing with anybody who's worth their chops, on good negotiation and good consent. And so, I mean, I think it's a really great place to learn some of those tools if you haven't before.
Yeah. Absolutely. And a lot of like, so there's one caveat that I'd like to add to the the general conversation around consent is that in a lot of spaces, especially when you're starting out, they'll tell you if it's not an enthusiastic yes, then it's a no.
Hmm.
And I agree with that when you're starting out because you don't know yourself very well. You're playing with new people, and I agree with that even when you're starting with new people, no matter how experienced you are. The enthusiastic yes needs to be there. Where there starts to be some leniency there is when you do get into a long-term dynamic and you do start to know your partner. They've expressed because this happens a lot.
Yeah, there can be more
Where
room for curiosity, right? Like,
there's more
well, I
room for
don't know, but let's
curiosity and
try.
hesitancy,
Yeah.
yes, because you know them well enough to catch them.
Mhm.
You know yourself well enough to stay in control. So that'll happen with my boyfriend. Like he has what he calls his bad idea fair. He gets all these fantasies, ideas in his head that he wants to try. And they sound really fun and great. But when we get to doing the actual thing, I can pretty much guarantee that he's not going to get 100% all the way there. And it's me to help him navigate that. So that's where, yes, he consent, but like, it's also just like, okay, like, I know that your brain wants to do this, your body might not be able to keep up,
Yeah, great.
so.
Cool. Thank you. So, are there any other kind of common pitfalls or downsides or cautions that you want to offer people who are just starting out in BDSM or kink?
Yeah, there's a couple. The first one goes to all relationships, whether they're vanilla or spicy, is that's the difference between boundaries and rules, right? So, people talk about boundaries a lot, but most people are setting rules. Like you're not allowed to go out my birthday weekend at all. You're going to spend my whole, whatever.
Oh,
A rule
totally.
is
Yep.
not
They're more
allowed to
like
do something.
ultimatums. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd say a boundary is an ultimatum. Like a rule is you can't do this. You're just not allowed. Whereas a boundary is you can do what you want, but if you do this, if you cross a boundary of mine, then I will, whatever. I will, leave the relationship. I will do this. So a
Yep.
rule is about, controlling the person. You're not allowed to do this. A boundary is you can do this, but if you go there, then I can no longer participate.
Yeah, I usually call them like false boundaries because they're meant to manipulate somebody into doing what you want them to do. And that's
Yeah.
not a real
Yeah.
boundary, right? So it's you need to do this in order for me to feel happy or whatever, but it's basically you have to do this thing.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to get to feel mad or bad or whatever if you don't.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
versus like a true boundary is actually about how we take care of ourselves. I
Yeah.
might have a boundary about somebody smoking in my car. And if they smoke in the car, I'm just saying, okay, I'm dropping you off on the side of the road. Like I told you,
Yeah.
you don't do that. And this is what I'm doing. And I
Yep.
can still care for the person. I can still be like, you're a great person, totally respect you, but this is just not okay for me. And this is my
Yep.
behavior in response. And
Exactly.
that's a boundary. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I love that
Yep.
distinction. So one other thing I wanted to just bring up, this podcast, like it's really important to me that we are inclusive and like really critical thinking towards societal biases whenever we do anything, whether it's science, I did a lot of, or whether it's BDSM and kink, we are human beings who bring our own biases and we bring the biases of our culture. And so I was wondering if you wanted to just say anything about what particular challenges you think that people who are from marginalized identities, whether it's BIPOC or neurodivergent people, disabled people, women, are facing when kind of entering the world of BDSM. And just to give an example, it's really common for people to feel fetishized and actually to be fetishized. And if that's not your jam, I mean, some people actually really enjoy feeling fetishized. But if that's not your jam, then it's really important to be clear about not consenting to that. And it's also okay to find support of other people who share your identity to help you navigate how that might feel being in the BDSM scene. But I was wondering if there was anything else that comes to your mind, Kat, about just kind of navigating as a marginalized person.
So yeah, one of the things that I've really noticed in the community as far as, fetishizing or like being fetishized as it really came up as a woman. I think, across the spectrum, most people who identify as women in the scene, the majority identify as more submissives. So I definitely got the feeling like I was very much like being pigeonholed into like people's specific desires. Like they've had this really like specific desire for a strong, dominant woman in their life. And like they really desperately needed me to check every single one of those boxes. It was like I didn't feel free to bring my own flavor, like my own desires. Like, and I'm speaking about this like coming from male submissives, that it was just like very much I felt like their desire was suffocating to me.
Mm.
Um, and I just felt like all of this pressure to like meet their specific fantasies, like a checkbox, and that didn't feel really good. So I didn't keep playing with folks like that. And one specific example that I'd like to bring is foot worship. And I have two kind of like contrasting, like little, experiences. And this was just like both instances were like casual pickup play. So we didn't do like a lot of negotiating. These were new people. It was just a lighthearted, fun little mini scene. And one man, when he worshipped my feet, it was like I was literally a goddess. Like it was like he was so like reverent and gentle, like he was barely allowed to touch me. He was just soaking in all of my divine essence, right? Like that felt really, really good to me. Like I enjoyed that little mini scene. And another time I had another little mini scene, foot worship with another person, and it was a very, very different flavor. And I'm not saying it was wrong, it just wasn't quite for me. The flavor that he brought was like what I would consider to be more of like the kind of fetishizing, where like I just was narrowed down to my feet. Like I didn't exist from the ankles up anymore. And he was very, when I say like passionate and just like, it's almost like I was being devoured. And, that can be really yummy if it was like my whole being. But it did not feel good to me to have that energy just focused on my feet.
Yeah,
So
that's a great example of how some similar, what we would think of as similar activities could really come out in a different flavor. And what did you do in both of those situations? Did you continue with the situation where it didn't feel right to you, or how did you extract yourself?
yeah, so that was, it was just pick up play at a play party. So that was fairly easy to extract myself from, because it was something that was really new for me and I was still new in the scene. Also, I do remember giving myself time to really like figure out like, am I liking this? Like, and I'm giving them a chance, like, because yeah, I think it's important, to give ourselves a little bit of a chance to experience things. But then also, like, once we start to feel that dis-ease, like, I sat with that dis-ease, for maybe a minute or so, trying to kind of like feel it out. And then I was just like, you know what? Like, I don't, like, again, I don't remember how exactly I stopped it, but I said, I don't think this is quite working for me, or something along those lines. Um,
Yeah,
and it
it can
was
be
like,
that easy.
it was literally that easy. It's like, okay, like, thank you. And, we, um, touched each other on the shoulder, I think, and, just, looked each other in the eyes, like, thank you. Like, I appreciate, you trying, that sort of thing. So yeah, it was, what do I want to say? Low stakes.
Great. Yeah, thanks for those examples. I really appreciate that. And that could be that I can see that being an issue for a lot of people is not knowing how to extricate themselves, or, if and when. So doing that, checking in with yourself, giving yourself a chance to determine, even pausing with somebody
Mm-hmm.
to say, I need to check in with myself for a minute. And then if you need to, just thanking them and moving on. That's
Yep.
totally okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, as we think about people who might be interested in playing with more kinky or BDSM scene type roles, how would you recommend people get started?
Yeah. My intro to my local community was actually through one of the social clubs here in town. And it's just a social club based on people who have shared interests in kink and BDSM. And the fantastic thing about them is they rent space at different locations and they have different types of events. So I am neurodivergent, I have ADHD and social anxiety. I really appreciated the fact that the same club put on different types of events. So I started out going to lectures where I didn't have to talk to anybody if I didn't want to. Then I moved to started going to like roundtable discussions at like this big restaurant, like 20 people around a table. And again, I didn't have to talk if I didn't want to, but I could. And then they also have events that are like more out and about, like munches. So, just getting, food and drinks, that sort of thing. And that's more like a freely social engagement kind of thing. And all this time at these different types of events, you get to know people. And then these same group of people, they also have, play parties every once in a while. So I recommend finding a local social club that has all of these different types of events. You get to know people before just diving right into a play party.
Yeah, absolutely. They often host workshops if you're curious about different things, like if you want to do some rope play or you want to learn how to use a flogger well or whatever, you might be able to go to workshops, or there can be like very just like social based get-togethers, like you say, and it doesn't all have to be, some sort of sex party in a dungeon kind of situation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And for this social club, like, 90% of the things they do, everybody dresses like in street clothes, like normal everyday clothes, like all the clothes stay on. There's generally no touching unless you're, doing a workshop where that's, actively talked about and negotiated. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really, really adore clubs like this that have like a variety of like options to interact with community members.
Yeah. And they're pretty common around the world, really, and certainly around the US. They're pretty common in, I would say, all major cities and quite a few minor cities have some sort of social clubs for BDSM. So the internet is your friend in looking for those.
Yeah. And so I would recommend, and how I kind of got started and how I found my social club was through fetlife.com. It's
Mhm.
not the only resource out there, but it's a huge one. And I really like it because they have an events tab and you can put in your city and, distance, that you want to search, 25 miles to travel, whatever. And it comes up with all of your local events. And the other fantastic thing about FetLife is through the pandemic, most of us were forced to figure out how to get on Zoom and things. And so a lot of folks have maintained these virtual rooms and virtual events, which are also listed on FetLife.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, especially if you live somewhere rural or you have some other restrictions where you might not be able to find or go to a local club. And there's so everything has pluses and minuses, right? So there's some downsides on FetLife. There are some people who are maybe, to be aware of or be cautious of on FetLife for sure, but it is a big resource for the BDSM kink world. And it's
Yeah.
not the only way to do things, for sure. There's lots of other ways to do things, and you can take and leave whatever you want there. But it is a good way to find some of your local clubs for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Thanks.
my little caveat for that, sorry, like my
Yeah.
personal experience with like messaging on some of these sites, it's far better to meet people in person if you can. If you do meet people online, please vet them thoroughly and meet in a public place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Always good advice. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Kat. I have so enjoyed our conversation, and getting to flirt with you a little bit was fun too.
Yeah.
So can you tell everyone where they can find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah. So I'm on my website is thistleandrosecoaching.com. I'm under Facebook and Instagram at Thistle and Rose Coaching. And you can find a profile and FetLife under Coach Thistle.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Well, everyone, we hope you enjoyed this episode and it got you thinking about things that you might want to try for yourself. And I will see you here next week. Hey, if you're curious about how you could have better sex and connections, go grab my free guide, Find Your Secret Turn-Ons. It's right on my website, www.laurajergens.com, and the link is in the show notes. I'll see you here next time.